This footage was shot on a camera that came out in 2018, not 2024, not last year, 2018. And I'm gonna argue it's still one of the best cameras you can buy in 2026, especially if you're a solo creator, a street photographer, or someone building a YouTube channel without burning your savings. Hello all. So today, I'm gonna be reviewing the Sony A7 III and letting you know how it holds up in 2026. The full-frame Sony A7 was a beast of a hybrid camera when it was released in 2018. It quickly became the go-to camera for many shooters when it came out and was praised for its low-light performance. Let's deep dive into this camera to see how it holds up in 2026. All right, let's start with the body. You notice mine is a little rigged out. Sony hasn't really changed the body design much. They've been consistent with the body design, and the A7 III looks very much like the A7 IV, the A7 V. If you were to place the body side by side, you would notice some differences, such as size and grip, but all around the camera bodies look pretty similar. So the A7 III has an all-black, sleek, professional look with a solid construction, and it feels like a quality camera. It features a durable, weather-sealed chassis constructed with rigid magnesium alloy and a robust polycarbonate exterior covers. Overall, it has a solid build that feels much better than something like the ZV series, which is essentially made out of plastic. So here are my pros and cons for the Sony A7 III camera body. Pros: 4 dedicated custom buttons, C1, C2, C3, C4. However, you can actually customize 13 buttons and dials across the camera, tailoring them to your exact preferences for photo, video, and playback. I've never had this camera overheat on me. It runs smooth in 1080p, 4K from 24 frames per second all the way up to 120 frames per second. So the 2 card slots. This camera has 2 SD card slots, which is going to come in handy when doing paid gigs such as events or weddings, anything that you need to have redundancy on. Pretty much all working professionals should have 2 card slots to write to during paid events or gigs in the event that one of them gets corrupted or damages or fails to write, or you just lose the card. The weather sealed body can take much more of a beating than advertised. I've shot in the snow, rain, sleet, unbearable weather, you name it. The camera always performs well and can handle inclement weather with no problem. I've even had the camera freeze on me, like literally, and I just let it dry out and ensure there's no condensation when warming the camera back up, and you'll be good to go to use it again on your next adventure. The EVF is great. If you don't know what EVF stands for, it's electronic viewfinder. It has enough resolution, does the job with good color depth. And the sensor on this camera is awesome. Even up to today's standards, you get 14 bits of raw information when shooting in stills. However, when shooting in video, you're limited to 8 bits. So S-Log2, S-Log3 is really not going to be your best friend. More on that to follow. The cons of this body. The cons on this body is the mini HDMI port. They suck. It's hard to come across. The port is very fragile. It can get damaged. It can break. This happens a lot. That's why they sell those cages with the little thing that secures your mini HDMI port. It's like a little clasp. I think that's what it's called, a clasp. So if you bump it too frequently, you might have to have your ports replaced. And the second is the port covers. Not a fan of the port covers. It's incredibly hard to remove them, and it makes it difficult to access all of your ports at once. So if you want to have microphone, HDMI, headphones, essentially you want to have your camera fully rigged out with all the ports being used, is going to be hard to access them with the camera cage. Keep that in mind. The tilt screen. Although the tilt screen can be helpful for hip height shots like shooting from the hip, it really isn't good for much else. This is one of my biggest complaints for this camera, and one of the key points as to why I switched from the Sony A7 III to the FX30. I mean for video, because I still use the Sony A7 III for stills, since it does have its 2 card slots and it's full frame, and it's much better at low light. If this camera had a flippy screen, I could have possibly dealt with any other issues that the camera threw at me, but that is a huge point of contention for me when doing video work. If you plan on using this camera for videography or cinematography, then you can mitigate some of these issues by getting a reference monitor. Having a big reference monitor, reference focus, and LUTs is great, but I would rather not it be a necessity just to vlog. The screen resolution isn't that great either, but I've seen worse. So you can rig out your camera with a reference monitor like so. This is a Field World 7-inch monitor. I have it facing towards the shooter because this is what I use to vlog. So essentially this is the vlog setup. Like look how huge this is compared to an A7 IV by itself, or a A6700 or an FX30 like I'm shooting right now with no rig or anything. So full camera cage, you have your shotgun mic, side handle, top handle, huge monitor just to vlog. So keep that in mind. Now let's talk about about the stabilization. The stabilization in this camera is almost non-existent for videos. However, for stills, it does help get down to shutter speeds such as 1/20, 1/30. And if you do have a lens that features optical steady shot stabilization, then you can potentially go down to 1/10, 1/5, especially if it's a wide angle. So don't count on the stabilization on this camera. If you plan on shooting handheld video, I suggest either getting a gimbal or putting it on a tripod. And if you absolutely need to do handheld work with this camera, make sure you make your camera heavy, such as with a rig, with a monitor, top, side handles, V-mount battery, rail system, all that good stuff. It's gonna cost you money. So let's go into the performance. Stills. As I mentioned before, the Sony A7 III takes amazing photos. If you're more into photography with a small interest in video, then I would definitely recommend this camera. The money you could save on buying an A7 III over an A7 IV or A7 V can be used to invest in some really good glass, such as Sigma, the Sony G line, Sony G Master line, Tamron, and other cinema related lenses. The low light performance in photography is really good, and you can shoot usable images up to 12,800 ISO with a good amount of latitude to correct exposure issues in post. If I were just considering a budget full frame camera for stills, it would 100% be the Sony A7 III. You can probably find the used one for about $800 to $1,000 depending on the condition. And some places still sell them brand new for about $1,300. I saw one at Best Buy the other day, it was like $14. It's honestly not that bad. A beast of a camera, full frame camera, great in low light, decent in video. You know, $1,400, $1,300 is not bad, but if you can grab one with a decent shutter count for $800 or $900, you have yourself a steal. So now let's talk about video. Keep in mind the A7 III was released in 2018. At that time, it was pretty decent video camera as long as you kept it stabilized. While the sensor is great, a lot of the video features are capped. I'm assuming this was intentional as the Sony A7S III were to be released 2 years later. With all that being said, you can still shoot some decent 4K footage out of this camera. It features several gammas such as HLG, Cine A1 through 4, S-Log 2 and 3. I do not recommend using S-Log 3 on this camera. You do not have enough color information captured to grade S-Log 3. I do really like the Cine profiles. My favorite is Cine 1 and Cine 4. And for similar log profile, I would definitely go for hybrid log gamma HLG. That gives you great dynamic range, great colors, and it's easier to grade in post. However, when you use HLG and you convert with something like DaVinci Resolve using ACS or Color Space Transform, you're gonna notice a red tint in the footage. It can be easily corrected with your offset wheels, so just keep that in mind when shooting in HLG. I think some of these profiles are great and they give you some decent room for grading in post. As mentioned before, the stabilization for video on this camera is not so great, so you're gonna wanna invest on either a gimbal or a tripod. And one tip for you, it does have a 30-minute record time. It only records XAVC codecs unless using an external recorder such as the Atmos Ninja or the Blackmagic Record Assist. I'm so sorry, I'll put it right here. It's the Blackmagic external recorder that can record ProRes for better editing. It's a little lighter on your computer, and I want to say it does take away some of the noise reduction, but don't quote me on that because I don't even have a personal recorder. So let's talk about the autofocus. For stills, the autofocus is still pretty good. By today's standards, it's not as sticky as Sony's newer models, but you won't miss very many shots. It does not have all the subject tracking options or AI options like newer Sony models, but it's enough to get the job done. For video, you can use the most basic autofocus features such as I think there's a wide, there's a expand focus point, but there is no eye tracking in 4K video, just so that you're aware. It's not a big deal. It would be nice if these features were in there, and it's just gonna require you to be a little bit more precise when pulling focus and how you're using autofocus. If you're more focused on video than photo, then you should be learning how to manual focus anyways. So all said and done, the autofocus is still pretty manageable for video, and it's great for photography. This camera uses the old clunky Sony menu system that many people would complain about. When I first started using this camera, I absolutely hated the menu, but it does provide you with a favorites menu, and you can assign custom buttons to control key aspects, thus mitigating some of the menu issues. The menu scrolling is not as fast as the newer Sony cameras, but it's not the worst experience. It's definitely manageable with a couple of tweaks, so I would customize all of my 13 custom buttons and knobs, or rather any knob that the camera allows me to customize to make my workflow faster. There's a couple videos on YouTube that will give you like the best button layout for cinematography and videography and photography. The Sony Imaging Edge app is trash. Absolutely trash. It's nothing like Sony Creators app. You really can't do much on there. You can monitor your footage and trigger the camera from your phone, but it's incredibly laggy. It's outdated. The app just sucks all around. So be aware of that. If you need to transfer raw photos from your camera to your phone, I recommend getting a dongle for your phone that allows you to put your SD card into your phone. I use a lightning dongle for when I use that iPhone with a lightning connector. And if you have USB-C, they also sell external interfaces for you to plug your SD cards into. Then you can upload them to Lightroom and post them on Instagram or wherever you post. Let's talk about the battery life. The battery life is a huge improvement over the A7 II and the A7R II. This camera uses the MP-FZ100 batteries that are also used in the Sony A7 IV, the FX30, and I believe the Sony A7S III. Pretty much all the bigger Sony cameras are going to use this battery, aside from like their top Cineline, like the FX6, you know, the bigger cameras. And you can shoot hundreds and hundreds of pictures on one battery. For very intense days out in New York City, I would probably go through a battery and a half, and I'm telling you, like, I'm shooting until my SD cards are full. If you're shooting video, you'll probably go through maybe 2 batteries in a shoot. For a music video, I've used maybe 2 batteries. So even on the most intense days of street photography or event photography, these batteries will last you the whole day. And some other key points on this camera, these are not exclusive to this camera, but here's something to consider for a good budget camera in 2026. The E-mount has tons of lens options, from Sony to Sigma to Tamron, SLR Magic, just to name a few. You can also adapt vintage lenses onto your Sony camera using adapter mounts. You can mount EF Canon lenses, you can mount FD old Canon lenses. Pretty much you can find an adapter for any mount that fits on the Sony, and that will open up your lens possibilities tenfold. And since this camera is full frame, you can also use Super 35 mode, which is crop mode, and that allows you to use crop frame lenses on your full frame Sony A7 III. The money you save on getting a used A7 III or even a new A7 III versus a new camera can be used to get a tripod, a reference monitor, a decent lens or two, maybe a cheap microphone. And while this camera does not record 10-bit like the A7 IV, at least it doesn't overheat. No shade to anybody. And just to close it out, although this camera is incredible at taking stills and video and has an amazing sensor, it does lack the new features, the new AI features, the new focusing and tracking features that cameras such as the Sony A7iii has. So keep that in mind when purchasing your next camera, but still consider the Sony A7 III as a beast of a full frame camera that you can get for potentially under $1,000. Now, I'm not saying the only thing that exists in the world is Sony, but I only shoot Sony, so I can't give you any recommendations on anything else. And so, just being completely honest with you guys, I hope this review helped you out. I've been using the Sony A7 III since it came out, and I still use it, and it's an amazing camera.